So I'm feeling to do this video to assist people who are relatively new and to remind people who are in the middle of the process that there is stages to the spiritual aspect of the journey of consciousness. And today's talk will be about the four attainments. So I'm speaking of these not theoretically. I'm speaking of these because I've traveled these and I've seen them, not only in myself and in others, but I actually am able to move freely between all these attainments. So I want most people who enter the spiritual journey don't really know that it's a journey. They don't understand that there's a beginning and a middle and an end. It's a process that occurs in time. Now there is also one stage. For some people, they step out of time. But even that has a journey, a process, an integration for as long as they're in a body. But I wanted to review something of the journey of consciousness. What makes this journey? This is perhaps the first conversation. What's journeying? What is traveling? And I describe this in the journey of consciousness, that we're each a ray of this one indomitable, unchanging, eternal truth that has come from the origin or the non-existence and came into existence. And we're a ray like the sun sends out rays of light and heat and energy. And this ray descends, removes itself, comes out of its original condition, seeking to return to that original condition, not knowing it's seeking because it doesn't know anything. It's just energy moving. And the only way it begins to know things is when it starts gathering qualities, characteristics, and it starts taking on attributes from the most subtle all the way to the most gross. So there's a descent of this ray of consciousness, and it becomes then more and more entangled into matter, more and more entangled into life. And then eventually in this process sets in motion an evolution. The consciousness, this ray, is taking on attributes, taking on bodies, taking on forms, taking characteristics, and then dropping some and adding others, and it's developing a sense of self. How do we know that it's developing a sense of self? Because we are all a product of this journey. And if you look on the planet, we're the only self-reflected living animal on the planet. We have the capacity for reflection, a capacity to look within and to question. We are self-aware to varying degrees from the age of 7 and on. And this is what makes us different from the rest of nature. In the same way, the insect is different than the squirrel, and the squirrel is different than the mountain lion, and the mountain lion is different than the human being. Consciousness has evolved through all these forms and has come to a place where now it's identified with matter and life that is so complex that it's able to wake up to itself. So basically what we all humans are matter woken up to itself as matter. It's not woken up to itself as consciousness yet. It's not woken up to that which is really living it. It's woken up to the form that it took on in the process of creating a separate sense of self. So the fruit of this 13.5 billion year evolutionary process is the human body. Because it's the vehicle that has allowed consciousness to wake up as the vehicle. The nature of consciousness, because it doesn't know itself, it can only know itself by becoming something other. And in this process, it becomes completely identified with that other. and it calls that other itself in the human state of consciousness. This is the creation, this is the fruit, this is the gem, this is the blossom of this evolutionary process. Is this matter being able to be self-aware, self-conscious, and reflective. So at this stage, consciousness is fully evolved. And then it spends many human lives playing out all the infinite subtleties and varieties of experiences and ignorances and knowledge and losings and gainings and sufferings and happinesses. And at some point in that process, it grows fatigued. It loses interest. And the attention tends to turn not outward as much, or inward more. So when the attention turns inward more, the human being is reaching the end of its phase, it's part of the journey, and becoming ready to move to the next stage. When it begins this transition from the human identification into something inexplicable other than the human that it's used to, this point of transition is usually very difficult, because now the consciousness is no longer as identified with what it was, but it's still not knowing what to identify with. It doesn't know what it is that it's trying to figure out, because it's no longer able to get value or fulfillment from the human existence. So the fruit of the evolutionary process is ego. Our ego is the habitual structure. It's really egoing. There is no such thing really in ego. There isn't an ego. There's a body, there's thoughts, there's feelings, but these are all expressions of egoing. Egoing is driven by consciousness identifying with the thought, spinning the thought, making the thought real, making it important, gaining in significance, because the consciousness is giving its force to what it identifies with. To the feeling, it's giving its force to its feeling, to the sensation, to its body. And so these things gain emphasis through the consciousness unwittingly giving attention to these things. And through its attention, it transmits its force to what it attends to. And it gains in power and importance for the consciousness. Because at this point, the consciousness doesn't know what it is, except for its habitual, repetitious structures of memory and thinking and opinions and reactions and story making. Its struggles and its efforts, its sorrows, its need to be happy or to have things a certain way, its avoidance of unhappiness, its fear, its losing control. All these things are expressions of this egoing, the identification of consciousness with the vehicle in which it woke up in. So, ego is the first attainment. It's the first attainment. Let's not dismiss it. To be a self-aware, self-reflective being is for consciousness the first attainment, because when you were an animal, you were just driven by instinct and necessity. It was just a machine, and you didn't know you were the machine. You didn't have a choice. You didn't have independent action. You didn't have free will. You didn't have even the appearance of free will. You didn't have enough intelligence to discern what was going on so you could look at something other than what was showing up. It's only in the human form that capacity comes. So ego, although it has its reflection in instinct, because ego takes its base from the body, from consciousness investment in matter, that's the foundation, a separate particle of existence that imagines it's separate, that could be eaten or could eat, that needs to run or fight, tooth and claw. So that comes from the body. That's the foundation of ego. It's a biological foundation to survive and to succeed. But ego doesn't know it's ego. Ego is just doing ego. It doesn't have a clue it's ego. There's no way it can know itself as ego until it finds something other than ego to notice ego happening. So when one begins the spiritual path, there's different reasons why people enter the spiritual path. It's almost all of them are human. One of them might be curiosity, intellectual curiosity, philosophy, religion, this kind of searching for the meaning of life and who you are and why you're here and what's the purpose of existence and how do I live? These are the 4 questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What is the purpose of life and how do I live? So they're curious, inquisitive, wanting to understand. Some people enter the spiritual path through that curiosity. Of course, it doesn't hold them very far, but it's the mind, the ego mind, trying to understand its circumstance. It's actually the beginning of the waking up in the mental plane of the fact that you're an ego. Living in an ego world where everybody is egoing. And ego loves to reinforce its position, its point of view, by creating agreement with others and by repeating its thoughts in order to give some sense of stability, some sense of strength, some sense of survivability, in order for it can proceed, to survive and succeed. Then there are people who come to the spiritual path because of distress. Because they've just lost a loved one. They've lost a job. They've just lost, they've heard they have cancer, or they have something, some trauma has occurred. And they're looking at what is real, what's the purpose of life. Because what was before seemed real, like it would last forever, is now gone. And in that distress, they begin an inquiry for something beyond the life they knew. And spiritual path is no different than the human path. To try to find meaning, to try to find value, to find a reason to live, a reason to go forward, a purpose behind things. So this search of meaning is inherent, and it derives its strength from the failure of life to fulfill you, the failure of life to be sustainable, to keep you enchanted, to keep you happy, to keep you distracted, to keep you engaged. So there's usually a break. I call it dejection. When a soul comes to that point of distress, they begin seeking something other than their existing condition. Even if their mind doesn't know they're seeking, something in them awakens and starts moving towards something unknowable. And the others come to the spiritual path because an opening happens. A spiritual experience happens. A glimpse of something other than the egoic paradigm. A glimpse of that which has an ego, but is not the ego. That which has a thought, but is not the thought. It can be a sense of expansion. A revelatory sense of you being not your body. Stepping outside of yourself in a sense of vastness or affinity. And often there's a sense of connection that occurs at the same time, of connecting to something unspeakable. Maybe you think it's connecting to everything living. Maybe you think it's connecting to the gods in heaven. But these are glimmers, glimpses. And once you have one of these glimmers or glimpses, then you're a seeker of that kind of experience. You're then motivated to find something other than the egoic paradigm. And it seems to be indicating that there is something else than the life you've been living up to now. And then there are some who come to the spiritual path because the soul is mature and the being in them knows, is connected with something within themselves. That when something true comes, their ears perk up, their antenna stands up, and it says, yes, that, whatever that is, that, give me more of that, without ever really knowing what that is. So this movement from the first attainment to the second attainment, which I'm calling the self, is the beginning, the first phase. It's a twofold process. One fold is in disengaging from the habit of your egoic identifications with your life story, with your situation, with your beliefs, with your point of view, with your habits. And that's one side, is a disengaging with the egoing part of you and an engagement with that which is not ego. Now we're giving it the name self, but it's not an object. It is something inexplicable. It's something that can only be known through experience or knowledge, the knowingness, a revelatory showing. It's like turning away from the earth and looking at the sun. It's a turning away from what you've habitually been oriented to something that is not fully articulate, but it is brighter, more poignant, more thrilling, more real than the life you've lived. So this thing you're turning to is either, in most cases, it's an inward capacity to connect to that inexplicable quality of presence or existence that is the what you are, the what that lives you, the quality of existence that is living you. You get connected to something. You're not certain what you're connecting to, but you're connecting to the seed, the ray of consciousness that has traveled this very long journey in this existence and has come to this point of maturity where it's ready to come forward. It's ready to come out from its incubus, to come out of its cocoon and to begin to manifest itself. So in spiritual literature, there's a lot of languaging about what this is. But it's actually a revealing, a revelation, an experiential revelation of what it is that lives you. And the more you have these experiences, the less invested you are in your previous identifications as an ego. And the more clearly you can see your ego. Because now you're connecting to that which has an ego. You're actually connecting to the source of power and energy and light in which the ego derived its existence. And you begin to start really seeing, and I say the word seeing, it's really not adequate. You really start experiencing your ego. You start recognizing and experiencing the price of living in an egoic paradigm. Because now you have a contrast. You've been able to step out of the ocean of ego and onto the shore of self. And in the contrast, you can tell when you're wet and when you're not. And that's the nature of it, is you begin to see your ego. So even though you've attained ego, how many lifetimes ago? Only when the self starts coming do you begin to actually see ego. See the structure of identification and attachment and desire and ambition and want and resentment and getting even and envy and hatred. You begin to find those, you find the ego in the process of the movement towards the truth of who you are, which we are calling the self or the being, which is within you. So sometimes you're appalled. Sometimes when you've been in the light for a while, you're appalled when you meet a part of your ego that hasn't been able to be visible before because you weren't bright enough to see it. You weren't alive enough to be able to handle being present with it. Because ego pretty much runs from what it doesn't want to experience. It runs from that which is threatening. Which runs from that might point to the fact that it doesn't really exist. Because the only thing that fears, the only thing that wants, the only thing that desires is ego. The energy behind it is truth, is being, is self. But ego is the only one that thinks it could die. It's the only one that can want something. It's the only thing that can suffer. It's the only thing that can be miserable. So you need sufficient light sufficient connection to this inexplicable quality of yourself in order to begin to see the roots, the core structures, the ancestral embedment, the error, I call it error of the evolutionary process that each of us carry within each of our bodies. The animal, lusting, cruelty, fang and claw condition of the foundation of biological life. And you begin to meet these human comparables: intolerance, bigotry, hatred, violence, cruelty. You find these errors within your own system, and they could be appalling. You could be overtaken. You could lose your current fragile connection to this inexplicable new quality by getting absorbed into a very dense, dark, difficult part of yourself. And this is what happens on this journey. Not just at this phase, but as you progress through the various attainments, your capacity to be present with the hidden, unwanted, unexperienced components of the human condition becomes more capable, more able to be with them, to see them, to feel them, to experience their price, their cost for aliveness, the consequence of living in that condition. The more this happens, the more you're able to connect, the more your being in you comes forward and longs for a stronger and more stable relationship with that which is coming. When this process of disidentifying with the egoic paradigm and moving towards a new paradigm reaches a threshold, I call it 51%, reaches a certain point, I call it the point of no return. You succeed in going beyond the gravity pull of the egoic, the historical egoic pattern, and you make a transition where the attention, instead of constantly being habituated to the old paradigm, becomes habituated to the new paradigm. When this happens, then even if ego comes and overtakes you, absorbs you, the strength, the capacity of this connection with that which is coming is strong enough to pull you out of it eventually. And so then begins a process where that which lives you, that quality of existence, that quality of purity and fulfillment and connection becomes stronger and stronger. And at one point, you come to a certain stage where you feel it's there most of the time. Now this lets you know that you're actually in the transition of the self. You're in the paradigm of the self, in the vicinity of the being of consciousness, but you haven't realized it yet. You've been realizing your ego. You've been seeing how real the ego is. Before, it was just something you were. Now you're seeing, separated yourself enough from it, and you can see what a nasty, difficult, entrenched condition of consciousness it is. And when you realize the ego, which by the way doesn't end until you drop your body, you realizing the ego, it doesn't mean you automatically realize the self, but you can only realize the self by being in the vicinity of the self. Somewhere, now some people at this stage, it's like the rubber band breaks. It just snaps. And the consciousness no longer can get identified with ego. It just breaks. It doesn't mean ego isn't still there. It doesn't mean the ego still doesn't take over. But the consciousness is no longer hooked into ego. It breaks from its identification and it becomes a profound kind of witnessing. It's not ordinary witnessing like where we notice how you're having certain thoughts or how you're having certain sensations or how you're analyzing a situation, which these are mostly mental and using the intelligence. No, it's this separation. That which habituated you to believe your ego was real can no longer believe it. This break occurs. The consciousness usually doesn't know what has happened, but it knows it can feel peace, it can feel calmness, it has a capacity to be quiet and serene, and in that quiet and serene, settled, stable place, it can see ego rising up, trying to grab it, trying to hook it, and yet it doesn't get hooked. It tries, but it can't get hooked. Now this break, where the rubber band breaks, means the rubber band's old and brittle. It means it's an old soul. It means it's been stretched and contracted, stretched and contracted, stretched and contracted so many times that it's finally fatigued. And one of the times it just goes snap, and it can't contract. It can't. It can try, but it can't contract. Now that's a grace. That doesn't happen to everyone. And you don't necessarily know what has happened. It may take years and years and years for you to know what it is that you are. You're just no longer capable of getting hooked into what you were. So when that comes, that is the state of the being of self-consciousness, that inexplicable quality. But you don't know it yet. You don't get to know that until you've made the next stage of the journey. In the next stage of the journey, what happens is this new consciousness, this new perspective, this new paradigm for being comes out of its individual orientation. Instead of just me being different, me seeing the world differently, it opens up to something even greater. And it begins to receive and experience energies, forces, knowledge, information that it never knew was possible. It starts becoming receptive to universal forces. Forces that are coming from this creation, which is much more, it's egoing. The whole creation, you might say, are vibrations or layers, lokas, levels of vibration, from the highest to the lowest. And you begin to move into a new paradigm of existence where everything is being known immediately. It's a way of knowing rather than thinking or analyzing or gathering new information. It is a knowingness, a gnosis, a gestalt, that there's a sense of what is true immediately in your body, in your heart, in your intelligence, depending upon which part of you is most transparent, most uncoded from the egoing habit. And then that ability of gathering information starts churning towards something greater than the individual. You start at this point moving out of the habit of the individualization of consciousness that is allowed for ego, or even allowed for the being, because who says something has changed is still this individualization. Now I will say there is an individual, there is a kind of ego that is individualized. The sense of you having an individual existence does not go away. It just becomes purified. It becomes a loci, a point of reference from which you then experience what's happening, know what's happening, what is starts revealing itself. That quality of purified ego, purified being, turns to something greater than itself. And what was once a small, localized realization starts expanding. When this happens, the individual system, the body that the person is still occupying, starts going through a transformational process. When the energies of consciousness at this stage of the journey are so much greater than what is possible to the individual ego, that the body, the cells of the body, the nervous system, the biochemistry, everything has to start accommodating this increased energy, this increased aliveness that consciousness brings when it's come out of its bottle, when it's come out of its box, come out of its identification. And forces start changing the body in the same way a caterpillar gets dissolved, dismembered in order to reassemble into a new vehicle, more capable of carrying these larger forces. This movement from the individual awakened being to the universal awakened being is, I'm calling it, the journey from self to God. You could say it's a journey from the individual to the universal. You could say it's a journey from the unnameable from the nameable. You could say it's a journey from the non-dual, from the dual to the non-dual. And it comes and it goes. It comes and it goes. So in this stage, between the self and God, this is where all the big spiritual experiences happen. This is where all the big revelations come. It doesn't mean they can't happen here, but they'll be just glimmers. When they happen here, they blow your socks off and last for days or weeks. And you find your body being capable of holding energy that it never knew it could hold before. And that becomes your new stable, becomes your new paradigm. It's like you're building a whole different kind of ego that's based on the truth of what it is, based on the consciousness that abides in there. It's based on that what it is rather than the who it is. And this unique quality of existence comes into place. It's as if the condensed ego becomes more porous, open. And I like to think of the example of a Coleman lantern. Where in a Coleman lantern, it's a nylon net that you tie up for the lantern, right? And what do you do first? Before it can give light, you have to burn the net. So that's all's left is an ash. And then you can turn on the flame, the gas, and light the flame. And then what happens is this net, this mesh, this remnant of once was a weave of nylon becomes a vehicle by which this force, this power, can provide light and heat. So essentially, this is what happens as we move into the state of the Godhood. We move into the state of that quality of beingness that is still within the body. These are spiritual experiences that still happen within the body. Often they're devotional, emotional. There's a sense of connecting more and more, rather than the individual connecting to an immediate environment or its ideas or its thoughts. It starts connecting to everything. And this sense of connection brings this feeling of love, this feeling of ananda, of bliss. So you move into this exalted state of which our human egoic condition is a dim, dim reflection. When one has come in this journey from the self to God, it often comes that we're so absorbed in the experiences that we don't pay attention to our ego. We don't pay attention to the state of consciousness we were in as an individual, an awakened individual. We're so absorbed in this transformation process. It's very hard to notice what it is you've attained. Because it's one thing after another, every day, day in and day out. There's these series of revelations that occur in the process, and this process I call merger, or unity. The movement to God as the all, or this movement to the Brahman, to the inexplicable truth of your own existence. This inexplicable truth of your own existence, the Buddhists call the non-dual state. But it's just words. It's just you being pure consciousness. And no longer the consciousness that occupies this particular vessel, but you're linked with the consciousness that occupies all vessels. You link with that consciousness, but at that state, you're not in touch with the fact that it's all other living things when you're in the Brahman state. But when you're in the God state, you are in contact with it in all other living things, in the flowers and trees and the sky and the mountains, in every sensation and everything that comes. You're experiencing the Godhood in everything. And the other is just all there is the all, or the one. But the one is also the all. So it's just a matter of perspective and the habit of consciousness. For some, experience is stronger, so the devotional connection with the creation is still there. For others, The awareness is stronger, and the one truth is there. And they call that nirvana. Unity is the state of nirvana. Merger is the state of God. You feel your godhood in the merger experience. You're not yet, it's not truly an attainment any more than the self is an attainment. When you merge with God, and when that process goes on, which can take years, or so at least, yes, mostly years, because transformation is breaking the habit of the body, there'll come a completion. It'll finish. It'll conclude. It reaches its full maturity, and it concludes. And when it concludes, you become truth. Now this is where you're no longer in the state of God. You realize it is real for you that there is such a condition of consciousness as called God realization. You become God realized. That means you are able to, for you can experience, you can be aware of what it is to be a universal being, not just an individual being. And the revelations of existence are continuous, both in feeling and in ideation, in thought. And there's no longer any separation between you and all egos, and all forms of egoing. There is no longer a repulsion or attraction. The ego is done, completely done. And when you come to truth, that is when you truly know ego. When you come to truth, then you can look back and you can see your own progress. And you can see that there was a stage where you separated from your identification with ego and you became that inexplicable individual quality that lived you. And you can see that the merger is not the important thing. That unity is not the important thing. The important thing is existence, is that which is existing. And at that point you've attained the origin, you have completed the journey, you've returned to your origin, but you're conscious now. You still hang on to the capacity in you that can know and experience. When you're in God merger or in unity merger, you as an individual is gone. There is no other. The non-dual state means there's nothing to know. There's nothing to experience because there's no knower and known. There's no experiencer and object to be experienced. In unity, there's nothing to know. It's all timeless, endless. But it doesn't last because you're still in a body. So it's then that you can know what it is you've realized. When you come out of the merger, when you come out of the unity, then you can see, oh, that's showing me the original condition when I'm not there. When there's nothing that I could call me there. What happens then when you come back, this state of knowingness, this state to experience without limit, becomes your normal. And you become a vehicle for light and truth and love and wisdom into the world. Without you even thinking about it, you just are. You're a channel. Because there's nothing in you anymore obscuring it, and yet the universe is able to find its way into this dimension through you. So truth finds its completion in its manifestation. It's like you won't even call it completion. The realization of you as that which exists, the I am that state, the appreciation of the thatness never goes away. The seeking ends. The truth of what you are is indomitable. Nothing can happen in the normal course of what remains of your human life that can shake you from that absolute real condition of what you are. But it's in the manifestation. It's in the moving in the world of egos, moving in the world of selves, moving in the world of gods, that you begin to understand and integrate and deepen the knowledge, the structure, the way the universe works, the role, why it had to happen, why we had to first be bound in order to be free, why we first had to be evil to be good. We first had to fall to rise. It sees the whole purpose, and the revelatory state of that consciousness is continuous. But it's no longer seeking. It no longer needs to go anywhere. It no longer needs to have any experience or more knowledge, because everything is an instantaneous revelation in each moment of whatever it is that's needed to be known. So this is the divine being. This is the final manifestation, is the culmination of this journey, where you come back and you cut wood, carry water, wash dishes, watch movies, talk to people, pretend, be the ego for entertainment, for enjoyment, for experiencing, for knowledge, and it reveals in the process, endlessly reveals the reason and the purpose and the necessity of this creation, the necessity of this whole journey. Okay, so I'm describing the whole journey in my own experience. This is what I've lived. So wherever you are, more than likely, there is a further, there is a more, there is a greater, until that state comes where there is no other, and your seeking is over. There's nothing to seek, because you become that which was seeking, and it becomes a stable and real condition of being. And what it manifests in this dimension is the fundamental principles. And the fundamental principles is there is only one consciousness, there is only one ego, there is only one body, there is only one mind, of which we all are emanations, individual emanations of these one principle. And each of us, the core of each of us, is the same. And that core of you is that one that says, I am. The one that says, I exist. The one without thinking says, I am, I exist. Automatically existing. That existence, you're an expression of. Each of us are individual expressions of the one existence. And that self-reflective quality that the body gave you, that the egoic journey gave you, never goes away. Because now consciousness knows of itself as consciousness. And once consciousness knows itself as a consciousness, automatically it becomes its source. It becomes what it is. It returns to the origin of itself. And this is what this creation came into existence for. And this is the purpose. And this is the journey that everything that in existence is traveling. It's the inevitable movement of this entire creation. Death is not the end. Earth is not the end. This universe is not the end. This is happening endlessly in multiple dimensions, in multiple physicalities. It's an endless unfolding. And this is actually what's happening. This is actually what's true. It's not our worry, or it's not our problem, it's not our ambition, it's not our desire. It's actually what's happening, and it's happening right now for each of us. We've just veiled from that fact. It's not something you have to reach for. It's actually right here, right now. It's really the truth of what's so. So the return journey is getting back down to the essential reality from which all this apparency arose. It's the answer of all questions. It's the fulfillment of all experiences. This is not an abstraction. I assure you, it is my experience. This can be traveled, known, and felt. Have faith in my words. That part of you that has faith in my words will be able to travel this journey. But the part of you that says, well, it hasn't happened to me, so it's not real, won't be able to travel this journey. You have to have faith that there's a possibility beyond the one you're currently living. And without that aspiration, without the sense of something greater, further, you can't get to the place where there then is no greater, where there then is no further. Without aspiration, without coming from small to great, from individual to universal, from personal to impersonal, from small to vast, from stupid to all-knowing, from powerless to omnipotent, all-powerful. This is why you were born, to travel this journey, and this is the ultimate Dharma. Okay, so the question is, in the journey from self to what I call God, what's the difference between God merger and the state of unity? Be more exact. Because I was more descriptive of the experiential state, which is the state of God merger, than the awareness journey. So on the experiential journey, it's experiences, increasing, enhanced experiences that derives its basis from the human experience. So if you experience pain as a human being, when you move into the process of merging with God, pain takes on a different quality. It becomes very, very intense bliss, almost unbearable. And you're not able to be with it until you come to God. But when the God state comes, even pain is ecstasy, for example. Or infatuation, the new romance, the love of the new romance. As it moves from the individual human being who fell in love with someone, and it moves into the universal, this human relationship, the love feeling, this infatuation feeling, grows and grows and grows in intensity until you come to the threshold. As a matter of fact, its greater intensity is right on the threshold when merger occurs. And then all of it disappears. It all disappears. But in unity, in awareness, you don't carry with this expanding consciousness the coding of the human experience as much. Therefore, in the awareness, it tends to move into these states we might call profound meditation, or samadhis, these periods of profound silence and stillness and deep, deep peace and connection. And when you come out of those states, this stays in your energy field, and you feel this quality of silence and stillness, no matter what's going on. There's no perpetration. There's no high experience, low experience. There's just this non-dual, non-changing capacity to be present. It's a transcendent state where the human doesn't even exist. It's a complete, expanded, infinite way of being able to be in existence. And the information that comes to you is primarily revelatory. It means somebody comes to you and speaks, and you see not only the source of where their human ego is at the moment, but you can also see the situation and the intentions and the purposes that brought this moment to this moment, to you at this time. This everything revealing itself into this field of pure awareness. Now, ultimately, unity and merger become the same thing. When one comes to the state of unity, there is this ability to experience all experiences. But the tendency for one who goes to unity is to go back into the state of awareness rather than to drop into the state of experience. But one who's come up the journey of experience will tend to drop into the state of experience, which would be this overall sense of the presence of God, the divine presence. So the same thing that happens in the revelation, there's no sense that there's something other than itself. It's just the universe is revealing itself. In the state of experience, it's definitely God. It's like a supreme being, or a Krishna, or a Vishnu, or whatever, Christ. It's a state of Christ consciousness from the experiential point. Most religions have their basis on the experiential paradigm. Only Buddhism and Zen have the focus on the awareness aspect. They're the same attainment. Just one includes the human experience more than the other. My experience is that when the awareness comes to the point of the threshold of completing truth, the journey, it has to go back and experience the unexperienced human component in them. They can only go so far without transmuting the unexperienced experience that's within their system. And this can be very painful, but it's usually a fairly short-term process of burning, of burning out the habit of the unexperienced human condition. So it doesn't go through this gentle transmutation. It goes through an abrupt fire burning, which goes much quicker, in fact, but it's more painful and difficult. They both complete themselves in truth. The nature of truth is it's the source of all experience, and it's the source of all awareness. It is the source of existence, but it itself does not need existence to be. This is the paradox of thought, the paradox of truth. It is that which is beyond all existence, yet contains the potentiality of all existence. So did I make that clear? All right, are there any other questions? So the biggest question would be, where am I on this journey? I assure you, if you're in this room or you're listening to this video, you've already on the journey between ego and self at least. If you've had experiences of the universal or in a vast awareness on a regular basis, then you are moving, without you knowing, you've realized the self towards the universal. For example, one of the clues of coming to the self is you can experience energy. We would call it's actually consciousness, but it's an energy in your body or in your awareness. Is this ability to receive a kind of sensation or move in contact with kind of a substance, of an energetic substance. This means that the self is now opening up to the universal. You're already moving towards larger energies than the individual energies. You're moving out of the paradigm of the individual ego, and you're turning actually without your mind, your personality, or your habit of your external self, which is primarily material-based, 5 senses, mind, habit, the reality of this presence, this present condition, this present vibration of materiality, consciousness being a material form, that you've moved out of that complete identification. Doesn't mean to come back every morning you wake up, or every time you come out of your meditation, or every time you stub your toe. It doesn't mean it goes away. It's still there. It's your identification with it that goes away. But that part of you that has gotten sufficient removal from the identification with the human identity and is now beginning to experience universal forces. Now, those who are around an awakened, realized teacher, this happens very rapidly. That you can actually be in the early stages of the emergence from the self, but because the teacher is like that Coleman lantern, a radiant channel for universal forces, the process, the ability of the consciousness to move from the egoic paradigm to the self paradigm is enhanced. And the possibility of the self, the consciousness in the self paradigm, the self attainment, to move towards the universal is enhanced. It essentially accelerates the process that would otherwise have taken much longer and be more haphazard. It's very haphazard between here and here. It's less haphazard between here and here. This you could spend many lifetimes forgetting that you were divine, remembering, forgetting, remembering, forgetting, remembering. But here, once you touch universal forces, you don't forget them. They stay with you and they grow. So that if you take another birth, you quickly come back and you remember what it is that you had lost. And you become motivated to proceed further in the journey. So once most people find their guru at around this stage, if the momentum of the consciousness is ready to go to the universal. Now there's a whole collection of gurus that are available to help the ego get to the self. This is prevalent. This is basically all spiritual material that you read. Most spiritual teachers are how to go from ego to the self. But when one's ready to go from self to God or truth, then the guru shows up. Then the grace is able to come in. And the world, the universe, creates the opportunity for you to make the progress. Because it's not possible to, at the beginning, to connect to the universal forces in a sustainable way that would allow the transformation without proximity to an enlightened being, to a fully realized truth being. Unless truth consciousness is there, transformation cannot occur, except incrementally. And ultimately, at some point, you would find such a person, an opportunity, and that would take you to the final transition that will allow you to go through that final membrane where you step out of the whole individuality into a complete, permanent, altered state of being. So where are you in the journey? Almost everyone is either in this room, is either in the vicinity of the self or in the journey from the self to God or the God to truth. People who are watching the video, they could be anywhere in this journey. The more further along on this journey you are, the more powerful this video will be for you. The more powerful this talk will be for you. There'll be a direct transmission of what I'm speaking of. It will be felt tangibly. The less further along, it will be a recognition. The ears will stand up. The antennas will activate. But there may not be enough to break the inertia of the egoic life or the comfort, the convenience of the sattvic ego that comes with the self, the happiness and knowledge, the thinking you know, thinking you're there, thinking this is it. It may not be enough to break that inertia. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Enough.